There is no rest for the wicked. And as you know us, Rich and I, we are going to be here on this holiday weekend. The Turkey Day slate is behind us. That was a fun slate. Rich and I both had some sweats. We might talk about that a little bit here shortly. But we move on to a full slate, even with the 3 games on Thanksgiving, even with a Friday game. We've got no bye weeks this week. So we've got a full slate to talk about for Sunday. So with that, we're going to jump right in. Rich will be with us here shortly. Welcome to Searching for Ceiling, presented by 1 Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis.
1 Week Season.
Oh, I think you muted yourself.
Oh no. We're back, baby. We're not back until I start talking with a muted mic. So now we know we're back, baby. This comment right here gets my juices flowing. Because I get like about half and half split comments between like Hilow, you talk too much, and Hilow, like, this is one of the cool ones. Let Hilow cook. So I appreciate that, Mr. Bagley. Not sure, man. Sorry, I butchered that. But we are back, dude. We had this awesome like break midpoint in the season-ish Thanksgiving slate that we get every season. It is one of my yes, I know. I'm sorry, guys. It happens all the time. Because I've been muting myself a lot because I've been sick. You might notice my voice is still a little jacked up. Anyway, we press on. But we had this awesome Thanksgiving slate, dude. I love it. It's probably the most game theory heavy slate that we have on the entire season. Why is that? We get that Bagley. Thank you. There it is. Bagley. Appreciate that. We get more information with each game because games are not being played concurrently. So we get kind of sequential. We have half hour, 45 minutes between games to reevaluate, take the information that we've got, make new decisions. Rich, how did your Thanksgiving slate go? And welcome back, dude.
Yeah, happy holidays to everyone. There's also a Black Friday game. Thanks NFL. If you want to get down to that, we got Tim Boyle going here.
Oh yeah,
it was great. The games were great. We had all 3 games went over, which is fun. We haven't had a lot of primetime games. I don't know if those all count as primetime games, but we count them. They're island games. A lot of island games haven't gone over. I had a real nice sweat going in. My wife had come down when the game was, I think it was, what were the Niners up at one point? Like 31-3 or
21-3 for 24-3. You're right. Yeah.
He's like, "Do you want to watch some?" I'm like, "No." I was like, "We got to watch the end of this." I was like, "I want to watch this." I was at that time, I was first in one of the snaps, and I'm like, I'm trying to hang on here. I got ran down and finished second by a Charbonnet team, and that last drive he caught a few dump offs, and I got run down, but we cooked it, and I see in the chat, I played it was a Jordan Love stack that actually got me there with CMC and Deebo Samuel, and I just had a feeling it was going to be a Deebo game based on how the Seahawks play coverage, and we got lucky. They dusted him off last night.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I entered 75 entries into the Millie because I just because the edge is so great. I think on that slate, I like to just swing for the fences. So I play the Millie every year, which I don't normally do on normal slates. And I had a lot of the right pieces. I had Watson. I had Curtis Samuel. I had 80% Deebo, 80% CMC. I 100%ed Dak, and I 100%ed CD with him. So it did not come together because CD obviously underperformed his expectations there. Anyway, let's talk about Sunday, man.
We have more games, more slates. I brought up a couple weeks ago too that this is always a stretch where I always feel like more confident, right? Like I've always checked in history, December has always been my best DFS month, and I'm feeling good about where we are these last few weeks, and it feels like we're ready to close the season, pretty strong again.
Yeah, so I was the same way. Typically my most profitable area of the season is the first 4 weeks. And then the second most profitable is once we have these established trends like we do now, which I think is what you were referring to by this being your most profitable, is we have the information, we have some data where we can kind of make these decisions. But that I put in so much work during the off season that typically those first 4 weeks are kind of like my bread and butter. And this season has been no different. Crushed the first 4 weeks. extreme lull the next 4 weeks where I was messing around with MME stuff. And now kind of back into like I've had a milli sweat. We've had some sweats the past few weeks. So with that, also notable for me anyway, my personal habits is we've got the 555 milli this weekend, which is pretty much my favorite contest ever invented. It's a beautiful mix between the MME bros and being able to like throw 4 or 5 entries into it for my single entry 3max crowd, which I very much am. So I'm excited about that. We've got a great slate. We've got an interesting slate. We'll just leave it at that.
It is. And that post Thanksgiving slate's always interesting because and this year we have the Black Friday games. Well, 4 games are already gone, like have already been played. Plus you have the Sunday night game. So it is and obviously they want to try to move some of those teams around this weekend for market purposes. So like you've got hot markets that are available, but they did leave us a couple hot ones here for us to attack.
Yeah, and the kind of governing theme about this slate is the median game total is down again. We've talked about that multiple times this year, what that kind of means from like developing your game plan. 30-point fantasy production games are probably going to be harder to come by on this slate for Sunday because the median game total is down. So teams are going to be scoring less points. That means less opportunities for those 30-pointers to develop. We saw that last main slate where it was like if you had to have the 3 wide receivers that put up 30 points or you were not shipping tournaments. This slate kind of has a similar feel. And you look at kind of why I can say that. We've got 3 games that have a game total, or 4 games, that have a game total around 36 points, which last year we would have scoffed at completely. Like, what is going on with this? This year, this is our new norm. This is our life.
We've adjusted.
Like, we have adjusted. But that said, we've got a nice little game total of 47.5 here with the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans. We've got a very interesting game that we're for sure going to talk about today. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers visiting Indianapolis Colts at 44.5. We've got the Rams and the Cardinals, who are both not rolling over and dying at 44.5. And then the quote unquote game of the week is going to be that AFC NFC showdown between the Bills and the Eagles. We also have the Chiefs here playing with a relatively low for them spread of 8.5. So what are you seeing from the macro of this slate? I want to
talk about that one too.
Yes. There are some games we need to talk about. What are you feeling from like the macro feel of this slate?
Yeah, the first thing I always look at in every slate is kind of where I think like the puck is going to slide to in terms of like meta, like roster construction, right? And this particular slate, like we don't really have like any like pay up running backs, right? Like the old school team jam them in. Where like even McCaffrey has probably come in relatively under owned for the seat on a regular basis to where he should have been owned. Like we probably should be jamming in Christian McCaffrey more than we have been this year. But that really hasn't been the way DFS has been played this season. And this week in particular, with the amount of teams that have been removed from the slate already, there just isn't a lot of that front end running back production where like guys like you're like vehemently like excited to play. We can sink our money into Alvin Kamara or Saquon Barkley or Travis Etienne for like some volume stuff, but like none of those guys are particularly objectively like great plays, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to tear down all those spots. And then with the wide receivers kind of being in the same boat, like we do have a couple really good wide receivers, but then we have a lot of question marks underneath like the top tier of like, Stephon Diggs and Arthur Juan. Like, where are we going to allocate salary to? Because it's really these top 2 quarterbacks, right? Like it's going to probably be a front end quarterback slate where Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are just going to be kind of everywhere this week.
Yeah.
And that's how I think people are going to start this week, is that they're going to look at the running back position and say, oh, I'm probably going to build around like 2 or 3 guys that are just like median type of guys. And hopefully I run into like luck box and some touchdowns and some production. And then you'll probably take one of those high price receivers, pending which quarterback you picked, to go with. And that's how people are going to start building their lineups this week.
Yeah, that's a great shout. We'll talk about kind of that macro perspective. Real quick question that came in. Which Jets player do you use tonight? There's some interesting, the best on paper play is going to be Breece Hall, particularly now that we can expect him to see a little bit more clear passing down usage. We saw Dalvin kind of shift into that That role that was vacated when they released who the hell they released?
Michael Carter.
Michael Carter. Thank you. When they released Michael Carter, Dalvin was kind of that passing down back, and then it was Izzy Abanikanda that was the kind of change of pace between the tackles guy. But we should expect Breece Hall to kind of step into a little bit more of the clear passing down role. Potentially seeing some 2-minute offense stuff, which would be great. We saw it on the end of the second half last weekend, the end of the first half before Zach Wilson got benched. We saw Breece kind of handle that role. So it's Breece. There's also, Xavier Gibson is priced at $800. We're talking showdown real quick. Xavier Gibson is priced at $800. He saw his highest snap rate of the season last week. You have Ruckert, the secondary, tertiary, maybe tight end, but he's seeing some increased role. If they're kind of turning this season into let's plan for the future stuff. He was a 2022 second or third round draft pick, I think. The tight end there. We saw Jason or whatever Brownlee, I forgot his first name. Brownlee. We saw him actually see some snaps. So they're very clearly and evidently looking to some youth to try and see what they have for the future. So those are some interesting guys to keep your name on your radar. Any quick shouts for the Jets side of today's game?
No, it's rough. Obviously you have to pick some of these guys. So
Greg Zuerlein,
Breece Hall, Greg Zuerlein. He said FanDuel, so I don't think kickers.
FanDuel.
Kickers aren't available, right? It's just defense. So on FanDuel, I'm a terrible showdown slate player because it's the same thing. It's why I'm a bad MME player, is because I struggle to make objective decisions that are bad, right? I'm an evidence-based player, and I feel like people that have their brain is geared for that, guys like Cody Main, they're so good at exploiting the edges in terms of construction on showdown and MME stuff and like that. My brain's just not wired that way. It's why I suck at it.
Yeah.
I'm not playing Emmanuel Gibson. What are we doing? What are we doing here?
Yeah, I dig it. To answer that question, it's Breece Hall. If you're forced into, obviously we have to be forced into one at least Jets player. It'll be interesting from a game theory perspective to see, and I haven't even looked at ownership for that game, but to see what the expected ownership is on Tim Boyle versus the Miami defense. So that'll be your one of the key points on that showdown slate. Anyway, we're going to look at I think we'll go first to the game that you said you want to talk about here, which was that Kansas City game. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing from this spot.
Yeah, I just think this is a really interesting spot for the context of this slate in particular, because that Bills-Eagles game is going to draw so much inherent ownership and at the quarterback position. And then we have that early game that people are going to see what they get at 1:00 between Jacksonville and Houston. We're probably going to have a spot where Patrick Mahomes is a legit pivot play this week. And I don't know how much he'll be owned. Obviously, he's on this streak where he's on this 3-game slide where he hasn't been effective. Obviously, everyone's talked about the Chiefs haven't scored a point in their last 3 games in the second half.
Yeah.
But this is a particular spot where it is set up for him to do well. The Raiders are an extremely passive defense. They don't blitz a lot. They play a lot of zone coverage. They don't really pressure the quarterback a ton. And when Mahomes still hasn't been pressured, he's been really excellent. He's completing 75% of his passes, 16 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They're not blitzing at all. And this is the first year of Patrick Mahomes' career where if you can disrupt him with the blitz, he's actually had a problem. It used to be a big no, never blitz Pat.
Yeah.
But, he's really struggled this season against the blitz. And it's probably just be due to his rapport with these guys in the receiving game, right? Lack of rapport, I should say. But the Raiders are still a team, when you look at, they're very opponent driven. They when they give up yardage and efficiency. So obviously we're going to see Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts be really popular. I think we'll see CJ Stroud be popular. Trevor Lawrence will be interesting. So it probably is an interesting spot here where Pat becomes a legit pivot play and he's in the late games too. So it's an interesting spot.
We're also probably some significant recency bias associated with them as well. Yes. We had Marquez Valdes-Scantling drop the would-be go-ahead touchdown with 2 minutes remaining, their last game. You actually had Travis Kelce drop 2 passes, both on that final drive, which kind of put them behind the sticks as well. We're not used to seeing Travis Kelce dropping balls. We had Justin Watson see 11 targets, and he dropped 3 of them, 1 in the first half and 2 in the second half. If my memory serves me correctly. 6 drops in an NFL football game is not not common, and we're not used to seeing that. So that's going to leave a sour taste in people's mouths as well. Anytime you can play Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, plus maybe one other guy, at low ownership, I think it has to be on our radar. So I like that shout a good bit. Pacheco's smash spot. It is never really a Pacheco smash spot because he is a guy who is almost always going to see 15 to 17 running back opportunities. Can a guy smash knowing that we need 100 yards and 2 scores, or 100 yards and 1 score with like something like 3 for 30 receiving? Potentially. Far from a smash spot. What are your thoughts on Pacheco here?
Yeah, I think he's more of like a cash game play, particularly on FanDuel settings, because there's no bonuses implied. Obviously, he's only had the 100-yard rushing game.
Yeah.
And it's more touchdown driven, where he's not going to, he does catch some he's catching more passes this year, but he's not a guy that has like these games where you're getting a lot of 5s and 6s. It's a lot of like 2s to 4s.
Yep.
So I think he's priced really more palatable. He's 6,600 on FanDuel, 6,200 on DraftKings, right? So like anytime you have a player that is his archetype and is priced nearly the same on a site that's more favorable to him, like he stands out more as like a guy you can play as part of like your core cash build if you're playing cash on FanDuel, as opposed to being a guy like you really want to chase like a lot of upside with it, 6,200 on DraftKings, because you're probably not going to flirt with either bonus. And if you're not going to flirt with either bonus, like he has to score probably multiple touchdowns for you to get there.
Yeah, and that's an issue with a guy like Pacheco playing on a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, where they have extreme red zone pass rates. I mean, it's no coincidence that he has scored 4 touchdowns this season, and 3 of them have come on the ground. That's kind of what we expect. It's very, very difficult for a guy like Pacheco in playing in Kansas City to score multiple touchdowns. So that's kind of the overall macro perspective of that. Anything else? Any idea of, are you going to be looking to attack the Raiders side of this game as well?
Probably not. I mean, Antonio Pierce, like we've seen this story, like he even complained about how many times they threw the ball last week.
Yeah.
We know that he wants this line. Like he's got that mentality, right? Like we've seen a lot of these defensive head coaches come in and want to do this. Just play boring football, establish run, have Aiden O'Connell not really beat them. At least Devontae's shown some signs of life the past couple weeks. But I think when I look at it from like from the Chiefs side, it's more of I'm going to be monitoring ownership and seeing where Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are. And then I'm going to be using that as a spot to maybe on some of those teams where, like, if I play one-offs, like let's say like if I play like a Michael Pittman at 1:00 or a Josh Downs, or, you know, just anyone that like a Tank Dell or whatever. And like these guys maybe get there. I might be looking to come for like the Chiefs side to have more access to ceiling on those rosters versus the teams that have the Josh Allens and the Jalen Hurts, right? Like that's where 100%. I'm just going to be monitoring. It's something I'm going to be monitoring because obviously if Patrick Mahomes is just going to be, you know, around 20%, and I don't think he's going to get there anyways, you know, 15 to 20%, but it's just a situation I want to monitor because like you said, the recency bias, the heavy ownership of the quarterbacks in that other game, like everything points to saying like, this is just something, don't overlook it.
Yep. Where I am honestly most intrigued with this spot is the Kansas City defense. We have, obviously they're on the road, they're not at Arrowhead, but this defense is extremely underrated. One thing to keep in mind, or to keep track of tabs of, is L'Jarius Sneed. Is he fully healthy? I know he was banged up in their game this past week. They're on a short week. All that stuff matters, but their defense here is a defense that is generating organic pressure on their own. They're playing a Raiders defense or offensive line that has not really performed well in pass blocking, a little bit more middle of the league in run blocking metrics, but which is also interesting how Josh Jacobs has struggled so much this season. Anyway, yeah, I'm not really looking to the Raiders here.
What a great price on DraftKings for the Chiefs.
Yeah, 3,100 for the Chiefs.
They're the highest price defense on FanDuel, and they're like oh my goodness, they're like the 14th highest price.
Yep. So that sticks out to me. That's a great shout. Let's comparing those prices, salaries between the two sites. Chiefs, they might. I haven't looked at ownership. Have you looked at expected ownership on DraftKings for the Chiefs defense?
No, I haven't really dove into the projected ownership just because the way this week is kind of played out with yesterday and being tied up and trying to catch up this morning.
I'm gonna check it out real quick.
In the house,
Yes, it's been. It's while this is like my favorite week of the season, it is also the busiest, obviously from the production side as well as just family stuff. So it's looking like the Patriots and the Chiefs are both expected to be over 20% owned this.
Yeah, I mean, at 3,100 for a defense that's been elite, right? It's not matchup based. It's not extremely matchup driven. Yeah, I'm showing them now, and I look at it as them on DraftKings to be the highest projected roster defense, and that would make sense.
Yep. All right. Well, there goes that idea. Anyway, they are a good on paper play. Let's now move over to that game that we were talking a little bit about here. The Jacksonville Jaguars and the Houston Texans. Obviously, the nice, juicy game total is going to lead to some interest in this spot. But from what I'm seeing from now looking at ownership projections, Trevor Lawrence is getting all the love from this game after that nice game last week. Now we have CJ Stroud, who has kind of been lighting it up, who's not expected to garner much ownership at all. I am seeing under 5% expected ownership. That, my friends, would be a mistake. What are you seeing from this spot?
Yeah, I see the same thing because, pricing, obviously, Stroud's pricing, the sites have finally adjusted. I would still argue Tank Dell, still very affordable. Not quite exactly priced up to where he should be, although it's finally gotten there. I don't think
he's
there's
over
a player
Nico for the first time.
Right. I don't think there's a player I've played more in DFS this season than Tank Dell. I can't think of it any season outside of the David Johnson CMC smashing. I feel like I've had Tank Dell. We're in week 12, and I feel like I've played Tank Dell already like 8 weeks as like a core player. And I think there's no reason not to play him again this week. I don't think that there's a strong argument to go against him. We've seen literally anytime he's been on the field, he's been the wide receiver one. We talked about it. He's playing 75% of his snaps on the outside, and that's where Jaguars are 27th in yards allowed per game to opposing wide receivers. They're 25th in yards per target. They've allowed a 7.9% touchdown rate to outside receivers. Also, that includes Tank Dell going for 145 yards and a touchdown when these teams played in week 3. So I find it hard to just get away from. The kid is just so good. He's always open. He has, because Nico is great from maybe if you say a leverage stance because he gets those downfield targets. But from his a full field route tree usage perspective, Tank Dell, there's a reason why he has leapt into the position of this offense that he is. It's because the guy just gets wide ass open all the time.
Yeah, his numbers against zone coverage, and obviously the Jaguars are running heaps of zone, primarily cover 2 and cover 3, which is important to note as well. But Tank Dell, he's 6th in fantasy points per route run against zone coverage. He is 5th in receiving grade against zone. He's 6th in yards per route run at 2.88. That said, Nico Collins is not far behind him in a lot of those metrics. And I think after now we have the great flippening of their salaries. They finally flipped each other. Nico is a guy that's extremely interesting to me in this slate. And there's another guy on the other side of this game that I think is equally as interesting and makes a great pairing with something like, you could even go as far as CJ Stroud doubles and bring it back with one not Kirk Cousins, Jesus Christ. Christian Kirk. Thank you. Sorry. It is holiday season. But yeah, Christian Kirk, we know that the Texans are also playing heaps of zone coverage, and Christian Kirk is typically the guy that we see used to exploit zone coverages for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Is he a guy that is on your radar from this game?
Yeah, all of these guys are from the Jacksonville side. It's a real bummer because I want to really get to Evan Ingram because of how Houston's been exploited this year, and Evan Ingram had a solid game against them. But it's just his lack of consistent usage in the red zone is such a deterrent because am I just paying for 7 for 60, right?
Yes,
he's got he's got 2 red zone targets, and because we love to play these tight ends and these bringbacks against Houston, and I want to get to Evan Ingram. I want to love Evan Ingram, especially, with Trey McBride probably going to be popular again. Dalton Kincaid going to be popular. I want to be excited about Evan Ingram in this spot, but 2 red zone targets the entire season. There's as many as Brenton Strange. Like, it's so hard. But yeah, I like the receivers. I think Christian Kirk was still on the field the most of all the Jaguars wide receivers, and Zay Jones coming back. I still think Ridley is like a guy that you can still be in on because of where Houston's giving up production to wide receivers. When these teams played earlier in the season, he had a self-sabotage game. He dropped a 35-yard touchdown. He had an opportunity, and nothing changed. I saw a lot of people bring up when Zay Jones plays, Calvin Ridley hits, and like that. A lot of that is mostly happenstance. It's just that. So Calvin Ridley is a player where he's being utilized by the Jaguars this season. He just gets high variance targets. He's getting a lot of his targets outside the numbers and downfield. And last week, those targets were caught. They were completed. And when those targets are completed, you have the opportunity for spike weeks. If you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars and you look at their wide receiver production this year and you just sort by points scored in a game, he has their 3 highest scoring games this season. Now, he just doesn't have a lot of median games. They're either really good or really bad because of the types of targets he gets. So he's always going to be a tournament guy that has access to the types of ceilings that he had last week because of how he's utilized. He's used heavily in the red zone. He gets a lot of end zone targets. He's using vertical targets downfield. So like he's always going to have that upside and be in play for tournaments. It's not just because Zay Jones came back and he was, used differently. That didn't happen. So even he, I think, is a guy it feels point chasey with him and Lawrence, but the matchups do kind of signal like they should both be in play again. Especially when we talk about Lawrence. I mean, obviously that'll just be an ownership thing, but this Texans team, we talked about a couple weeks ago when they faced the Bengals, like this is a team that was due regression from a passing touchdown perspective. And we're starting to see it. It's starting to come around. They've allowed 4 top 10 performances now in their past 5 games. We're talking guys like Baker Mayfield, Desmond Ridder, Derek Carr, it's not like they're getting out here flooded by all these great quarterbacks. So it does make sense for Lawrence to still be on the board. I just think when it comes from an ownership stance, if we're going to have a 10% delta between Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud, I'm absolutely going to want to play CJ Stroud.
Yeah. 100%. I love you mentioned the talk of the town last week was Zay Jones is back. You play Calvin Ridley. I love circumstantial statistics like that. Even yesterday we saw the Lions playing with a waxing gibbous moon.
That was fun though. That was just fun.
Yeah. And it ended up hitting, and I was like, oh yes, these are the predictive metrics we need. Damn it. What are we even doing over here?
I had fun with that tweet. I had fun with the waxing gibbous tweet. I had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah. This is not surprising, to be honest. We saw Brownlee playing over Lazard once Tim Boyle came into the game, and I think this is a case of they are full mailing it in and seeing what they have for the future. Enjoy that Allen Lazard contract there, New York Jets. I'm glad that Aaron Rodgers got him over for you. Sorry, that was below the belt. I apologize. Yeah, but this game here with the Jacksonville Jaguars and Houston Texans, obviously we can go play this many different ways. This takes some salary, but something along the lines of here is an amazing starting point for a roster. We can do it a little bit more comfortably this week because, like you said, at running back, who do we want to pay up for? The big concern with us when we're thinking through that discussion is there's probably going to be a solid chunk of rosters in play this weekend that are built like this, where you're looking for who is the most palatable guy? Stop me when you're scrolling down. Who's the most palatable guy that I can start playing in this mid-range of running backs? So this is probably going to be rather common roster construction, but it is viable on this slate nonetheless.
Yeah, DraftKings, you're going to get a ton of Rachaad White, I think. Is going to be a lot of core guy. He's got a healthy median. He gets all the touches. He's facing a team indoors that gives up a lot of touchdowns. I think we're going to see Rachaad White be the guy people hone around for sure.
Let's talk about that game now. That'll take us over too, because this game is extremely interesting and appealing to me. These are the 2 defenses that play the highest rates of cover 3 in the NFL. What does that mean to us? Typically against cover 3, it allows a higher first read target rate. And when you look at these offenses, who are those first reads? It's Mike Evans and it's Michael Pittman. A little bit less so Josh Downs. He's kind of entering that conversation as the season has progressed. But those two guys in particular, Mike Evans and Michael Pittman, are extremely interesting on this slate. Even more so if we expect guys like Rachaad White, and potentially we could see some ownership settle on Jonathan Taylor as well. So how are you seeing this game? Is this a back and forth, lights out, shootout type environment? It involves the Colts. This is important. How are you seeing this spot?
Yeah, both of these teams have kind of been our like ugly duckling like crossover teams like all season for us, and now they play each other. Like there's been a lot of games where like we've been like doing buck stacks with who they play because they blitz a lot. They play, like you said, a lot of single high for the like in the current construct like NFL meta. They've had competent like actual like quarterback play this year, so they've been kind of fun, and they have a condensed target tree, right? So they've been like a team like we've always looked at for like these game stacks. Colts, very similar way, but like when you put these two teams together, a lot is going to be driven on just how well these quarterbacks play. But there is like a pro side to make for both of these guys being good. I mean, you look at Baker's struggles this year have come all against man coverage stuff, like and like pressure stuff. Like so, like we're not going to get any of that. Not only do the Colts play like the most cover 3 in the NFL, they play the lowest rate of man coverage. So we probably won't see a lot of that. He's 9th in the NFL in completion rate against cover 3, 7th in quarterback rating. So it just gives us competency. The cool thing about this game is I like it because you can actually play like through the core of non-quarterbacks, but you also can go through the quarterbacks if you want to pay down, because I do think that you just need either of the top guys just to not fail, right? Like, or to fail for you. And then you've got this asset. The only problem I have with that is the same thing we keep harping on. It's like, all right, you save the salary. Where are you using it? Where is it going? I would say maybe you like that's where Travis Kelce would come in, like on builds around these teams. Maybe you don't always have to stack Kelce with Mahomes, but like you would maybe use a lot of your salary you save for a Minshew or a Baker to add like a Kelce to that team, right? But that's really it, because you can play this through that. You can save the salary on quarterbacks, but you can also play it through, like you said, just an easy mini. You can do a Mike Evans, a Michael Pittman, or do like a little core where you're doing Mike Evans, Rachaad White, Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, like stuff like that, right? Obviously, if you're playing 2 receivers, you inherently almost always want to add the quarterback, because if those 2 guys are going to get there, like Minshew's got to go along for the ride. But this league, you don't necessarily, like I said, have to do that, because the salaries like you're going to save isn't really going to go anywhere.
Yeah, 100%. We've seen
this might be a slate we leave money on the table too.
You can't do that, dude. That's in the bylaws. You're not allowed to leave more than $300. Just kidding, guys. This is very, very interesting to me. I had not yet like fully considered, I don't think, Baker Mayfield and Gardner Minshew, but now you got my juices flowing here. You got my wheels in my head are spinning, because you can do some very interesting things.
You can.
Especially with Minshew, because we're looking at a Tampa Bay defense. Obviously, we've talked about Vita Vea, his importance to this run game. But with Vita Vea healthy and in the lineup, he is like one of the great run stoppers in the league. He is one of the great immovable objects up there.
They haven't allowed a rushing touchdown to a running back yet,
which is insane. That is like that. You look at, I mean, and that makes sense. Like, look at who their head coach is. Look at how they have Vita Vea. This makes sense, right? But that said, they're playing a ton of cover 1. They're playing a ton of cover 3. And these teams are at least competent. We haven't even talked about the fact that the Colts are an extreme up-tempo offense. We haven't even talked about the fact that we have seen them be willing to attack an opponent's weakness with their current coaching regime, which very much is against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers through the air. So a lot of very, very interesting things. Gardner Minshew, in that discussion from a theoretical standpoint, if you're playing him with Michael Pittman is not a guy that is very likely to push Gardner Minshew over that 300 passing yard bonus. Obviously, we've seen he has 1 game all season hitting the 100-yard threshold, and we know that came 14 targets. So we know he is a intermediate type role. We know he's a like prototypical X type wide receiver. We know that he needs extreme volume to kind of rack up the yardage. So who is the guy that is likely to add to the yardage that you need for a guy like Gardner Minshew? So all that discussion is kind of theoretically based to say that you almost have to double stack Gardner Minshew, I would say, if you're playing him on this slate. But I think that is well within reason, and I think you can do that smartly. Who is it Josh Downs or
I mean, I would love
this
for Alec Pierce to be a thing, but I mean, we're grasping. Like it's
Yeah.
more of like a step of faith, and like so like as an objective recommendation, I can't get there, but it'd be cool if he actually did something this year. But
do
Josh Downs
something.
for sure. Josh Downs for sure is the guy, and you talk about like the where the Bucs are getting beat. I mean, you talk about like inherently, like when you have cover 3 and you have a lot of man coverage. I mean, that slot guy, that hot receiver is gonna benefit, and we've seen that's where Josh Downs it hits. That's where Tampa Bay is giving up a lot of production. They're giving up kind of universal production to wide receivers, but they also are getting flooded from the slot. So yeah, I love Josh Downs, and particularly because he was kind of out of sight, out of mind the last few weeks too. Obviously, we don't slide anyone through like DFS these days. Obviously, everyone knows like you're not getting anyone that nobody knows about, but he has been one of these guys that people were hot on for a number of weeks, and then he got like a knee injury, went on by. So like he hasn't been around. So maybe that helps us out here of sneaking him through in some spots.
Yeah, it's also an interesting setup from this team, and we're going to continue talking about it because it's a very intriguing spot. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we know they blitz a lot. We know they struggle to generate pressure when they do blitz, and we know that they're near league average in man and zone coverages. But we know that they're primarily utilizing cover 1 in man, and we know that they're primarily utilizing cover 3 in zone. So you look at the splits of the pass catchers for the Colts. Michael Pittman is the dude against cover 1 and against man coverage for the Colts this season. He has 0.51 fantasy points per route run versus man coverage. That is top 12 in the league. But Josh Downs is kind of emerged as the dude against zone and against cover 3, where we talked about like first read. Both of these primary coverages that the Bucs play kind of harbor first read production, both against cover 1 and against cover 3. So now that Josh Downs is kind of emerging as a viable first read option in this offense, I think both of these guys, and it's kind of backed up by the numbers here. Josh Downs leads the team in fantasy points per route run, in yards per route run, in receiving grade, and in targets per route run against zone coverage this season. So very interesting. I think you can do something fun like this and have some salary left over to have some fun with as well. Anything, are you at all interested? You mentioned Rachaad White, any Chris Godwin love, any of these secondary options on Tampa?
I mean, it's tough from like a stacking perspective. I mean, Godwin's another one of these guys. I mean, he does have really high target shares against it contends target tree. We hit upon it like when against cover 3, like he's right behind Evans kind of in target rate and targets per out run. But we just haven't seen the spike week potential for Godwin. And maybe we do get there, but he just hasn't been that guy that has that. So like inherently, like he's just not. I mean, he hasn't reached 70 yards in a game since week 6. Still has the 1 touchdown. We've just kind of seen it all orbit around Evans, and Evans is one of these guys I think he gets there more on like 1 to 2 targets that make a difference for his game. So I'm more focused on Evans still too. But if you do want to if you want to be creative, I can promise you Chris Godwin is not going to be highly rostered.
Yeah, and Mike Evans is also a guy that we should not let fall through the cracks for the fact that he has 5 double-digit target games this season. So he's not just like this downfield type guy. He can be that like out guy, that slant guy, that double move deep 9 route type guy. He kind of has a rather robust route tree, and he continues to get it done this season. So he can be that like first read target guy just as much as Chris Godwin can here.
I love this game for like a lot of your like early kind of one-offs to builder, and then you kind of know what you can do going into 4 o'clock. Like because if you catch that Josh Downs heater or that Michael Pittman heater, like you know what you kind of need to do coming in, you're good, man. And then if those guys fail, you also know what you need to do by going to like Rams Cards, like as a away from Eagles Bills.
Yeah, and
Or the Chiefs.
that's an interesting side note because we have these 4 afternoon games. With all the attention, or not all of it, but a lot of the attention in the afternoon likely to be on this Buffalo Philly game. We also have the Rams and the Cardinals, who have a moderate plus type game total for this year's standards. And then we have the Chiefs that you talked about earlier. So let's talk about the Buffalo Bills and the Philadelphia Eagles real quick. Is this simply a case of play the top options on each offense? How are you seeing this one?
Well, I mean, for the Eagles, it's very clear, right? Like and now that we removed Dallas Goedert from the equation, it's more of what we saw last year. I
Yeah.
mean, they did have Julio Jones on the field more, more 11 personnel, but the ball does just Devontae Smith just gets more targets, right? That's like
Mhm.
consistently what has happened when Dallas Goedert hasn't played. I also think it's interesting too, is when you think like how the Bills have defended wide receivers this year. The guys that have had big games against them have typically been the secondary wide receivers. The wide receiver one targets necessarily haven't really run out on them. Like the big games have come from like the T Higgins. I guess Calvin
Yeah.
Ridley is like more of like we could have an argument of like who you consider like the wide receiver one, but like it has been the more the secondary guys. I don't want to call it ancillary, but the secondary guys, which would be more signal too for Devontae Smith to keep going. But I mean, obviously AJ Brown is good enough to get over on anyone, especially when we're talking about two guys having 60% of the team targets, right? Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, that Eagle side makes it a lot more clear for me. I think this is a fun game because is this a game we can dust off Gabe Davis?
Uh-oh. I think it is. Oh man. I've been waiting, dude. I've been
Can we
waiting for
wait to
that.
hate ourselves at 4 o'clock?
Yeah. Yes, you can. That's a very interesting theoretical discussion to have in and of itself. If you look at the games that Gabe Davis hits, they are typically coming, and this is over the last 2 seasons. So we'll even throw it back to the last 3 seasons, his kind of demi breakout season 2 seasons ago. Over the last 3 seasons, when Gabe Davis has hit, so we'll just use it nice and easy, like 4x salary multiplier. We know it's a lot more in depth than that to decipher what hitting means in DFS. We'll just use that. In 90+% of the games that Gabe Davis hits, so 4x again, just for this discussion, Stephon Diggs is also quote unquote hitting. So it's a different discussion when you talk about the elites of player pricing, because hitting for X salary multiplier is far less common in that range, obviously. So this whole discussion kind of brings in this discussion of like what is important in DFS. There's so many things, but like if we're just primarily using salary multiplier, it is most applicable to like your mid-range players, your players that are priced below between 7,900 and 5K. The guys below that, all you're cared about is raw points. The guys above that, all you're worried about is raw points. The rest will work itself out. So if we keep that in mind, that discussion, the definition of Stephon Diggs hitting is a little bit different than Gabe Davis hitting. But if Gabe Davis, the games where he is going for X, Stephon Diggs is historically has a very good chance of also hitting. So that is a very interesting discussion, because a lot of the Gabe Davis ownership that we're expecting this weekend is probably going to be of the mini correlation, the correlated one-offs, the not or just paired naked with Josh Allen. The theoretical optimal way of playing Gabe Davis is exactly this. So that is very interesting. And to that point, we talked a little bit about this last week. Or were the Bills on the main slate last week? I can't even remember.
They played the Jets.
On the main slate?
Yeah, they were a 4 o'clock game.
Okay. So we would have, I know I talked about this idea of the wheels, quote unquote, theoretically coming off for Josh Allen. But that kind of, we saw that. And how we saw that, we saw 3 designed quarterback draws for Josh Allen last week. And that was something that we had not seen with Ken Dorsey calling plays. So is this a case of, yeah, they're going to be more aggressive with Josh Allen? I mean, all we've heard from Ken Dorsey all season is like, yeah, Good job, Josh Allen. You checked it down there. You didn't take a hit, and you didn't throw an interception. It's like, that's not what we want Josh Allen to do, man. we want Josh Allen slinging and taking off and running. That is what we want Josh Allen to do, and that is something that we could see a little bit higher frequency here. Are you seeing the same thing?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think Josh Allen is. It really just, when you're talking about picking the quarterbacks between these games, it comes down to just, I think, a health factor. Like Jalen Hurts is clearly still. I mean, he's getting there for fantasy still, and I'm not saying that I will not be playing Jalen Hurts. I will have Jalen Hurts tournament teams, but it just, from you're talking about picking between these two guys, like we have a healthy Josh Allen versus a clearly limited Jalen Hurts to some capacity.
Yeah.
Where we're relying on the tush push, because it's interesting because his rushing touchdowns are literally all off of that, except for like they had a QB power one last week, which was like, oh cool, he can still score touchdowns without the tush push. So it's pretty nice.
Yeah.
But that's really what breaks the tie for me between these two quarterbacks, is that Josh Allen is healthy and clearly Jalen Hurts is not. But I'm still going to be going through the Eagle side just inherently because I do want to get access to some of the pass catchers. I think this is a game where it's both passing sides, right? Like we've got the Eagles have an elite run defense. So are we going to attack, through like James Cook? Probably not. DeAndre Swift, the Bills have been excellent against the run for the past 5 weeks. They added Linval Joseph 3 weeks ago. So they have had a lighter schedule, but like they're just not giving up explosives, which was their bugaboo early in the season. Because they were a good run defense earlier in the year, but they had a great stuff rate. They were getting in the backfield, but then they would just give up like a barn door run. And
it was very weird.
Yeah, those have evaporated the past couple weeks. The past 5 weeks, actually, they're 29th they're 7th in the NFL in explosive rushing yards allowed to running backs over that span that I mentioned, the 5 weeks. Only 3.3 yards per carry. Obviously, Swift's a guy that's kind of cattywampus for DFS anyways. Like, he needs touchdowns. He has weird receiving usage. He's just a tricky guy. He's never a guy like, I'm just not drawn to his archetype. If he beats me, he beats me, is what I'm saying. Like, if DeAndre Swift beats me, so be it. But this is a game I want to attack through the passing side. The unfortunate part is all the cheaper ancillary additions come through the Buffalo side because the Eagles are only throwing the ball to 2 players.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an interesting discussion as well on the Buffalo Bills run defense, because through the first 6 weeks of the NFL season, I was scratching my head because they were around 5 yards allowed per carry, but they had the second fewest yards allowed before contact. It's like, how does that happen? And it was exactly that. Their stuff rate was high, but they were allowing these splash plays against them where it was like every 3 rush attempts, they were giving up a run of 10 plus yards. It's like, what the hell is going on here? Obviously, they had some very key linebackers leave the season. They've had some secondary issues with injuries. But yeah, this is not a spot where you would clearly and evidently want to be attacking them on the ground, despite what some of the top level predictive metrics are saying, because you start digging down, like you said, and it's very clearly a spot not to attack. So that kind of leads us back to what you were talking about. This is a spot where we could see some fireworks through the air.
I think the build you have plus Devontae Smith is like where I'm looking, like to build a team like this way, like through this game. That's like kind of what I'm looking at, that core right there.
We also have Dalton Kincaid, who we know his role with Dawson Knox out. We also have Khalil Shakir, who is going to probably catch some eyes for the box score watchers out there. Either of these guys that you're going to be looking to pepper in, or is it pretty much this core here?
Yeah, I mean, that's my main core. But yeah, those two guys are in play. I mean, Khalil Shakir is a guy. I mean, I just loved him as a prospect, so I'm just hanging on to like this. Like, I'm just taking like this like past month, and hopefully in 2 weeks when Dawson Knox is back. Because the other thing too is McDermott basically said Knox won't play this week. He's eligible to come off of IR, but they have a bye next week and they want to give him an extra week. So we're going to get another week of them playing more 11 personnel. And who knew that, them playing more 11 personnel is better for this offense? Only been talking about that the entire season. But yeah, both those guys have great matchups though. So I'm fine with it. I do like Gabe the most. And like, I feel like Shakir is a guy that people will chase a little bit because he's been a little bit more productive. He's cheaper. But I do like Gabe a little bit more, but I have no problem with either of these guys.
Do you see Slay locking up with Stephon Diggs? Do you think this is a potential shadow spot?
Maybe, but I also don't mind that, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
mind when elite guys get shadowed because if you're going to say, hey, you're going to put him on an island, like, it gives my guy a chance to make a play now. Like,
Mhm.
so I like it both ways. Like, but I don't know if they will do that. But if they do, so be it.
Yeah. And also, we have this kind of like 5-week stint of Stephon Diggs having less than optimal performance here. I don't see him garnering a lot of ownership. Actually, I want to check that real quick while we're talking about it.
I like him a lot from a
Yeah,
top down perspective.
yeah, sub 8% expected right now. So yeah, love that.
I mean, the
Love
last
that.
2 weeks, the last two teams he faced, the Broncos and the Jets, allow the lowest rate of points they allow to the wide receiver position. Of the
Yep.
points they allow, wide receivers score the fewest amount of points. So it makes sense he would have downer weeks. Like you would want him to have a higher floor than he had the 2 weeks he had. But now he faces a team in the Philadelphia Eagles. The highest rate of points they allowed on a per game basis go to wide receivers. 63% of points they allow go to wide receivers. We saw on Monday night there was an opportunity for the Chiefs wide receivers to have by far their best game of the season. They
Yes.
left a lot of it on the table, but man, like the Chiefs wide receivers theoretically could have had the best Chief wide receiver game of the season against the Eagles.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, MVS, man, that was brutal. Absolutely brutal. Justin Watson, even 3 drops, dude. Anyway, we digress. We've got about 9 minutes left. Is there any other? Do you want to talk about the Rams Cardinals? Is there any other game here in the early slate that you want to talk about?
I just want to talk Rams Cardinals from like a game theory stance of, obviously that's going to be the game. If your 1 o'clock guys fail, you're going to have to look to make pivots there in that game, obviously, versus Bills, Eagles. And that's
Yeah.
why it stands out. It also stands out because I think a lot of the pieces are in good spots I'm using this from the Rams side, but they're all going to be kind of come with question marks, right? Like Kyren Williams, there will be some hesitation based on what is his initial workload. Obviously, people
Yeah.
had what happened to Devon A. Chan last week. They don't want that to happen to him
Yeah.
again this week. And then both Nakua and Cup are probably going to play under the Q tag. So like that's always going to add like an element where those guys come in a little bit under on too. So like if you're trying to catch points and your 1 p.m.s fail, like I think Cup, Nakua, Kyren Williams, those are going to be the guys you're going to want to be focused on, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also an interesting aspect of that is the last time these two teams played, you look at all the way back in week 6, this was Cooper Kupp's best game of the season. This was a game where Kyren Williams went bonkers for 158 yards and a score. And this was a game where Puka Nacua was kind of playing third fiddle here. Only the 7 targets, only 4 catches for 26 yards. So again, are people going to be looking at, box score watching from this spot? I think on paper, it is very clearly Kyren Williams and then, but again, like you said, we have that kind of ambiguity associated with his expected opportunity share. If I were a betting man, knowing Sean McVay and knowing what he has done in the past, I would say that Kyren Williams returns to a rather robust role here. They released Henderson. They released him this week, which should pour one out for him, man. He just did nothing but come in and do what the team asked of him and then got shit canned. Either way. But who are they going to give? Are they going to give Royce Freeman touches? Are they going to give Zach Evans touches over Kyren Williams? I think not is kind of where I'm at. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, and Kyren was so good in the pass game, and not as from a
Yeah.
catching pass perspective, but as a pass protector, like he was just trusted. And
Mhm.
that was one of my big things. I think when we came on the show the week that when Zach Evans was looking like he was gonna be chalk, and then obviously
Yeah.
we got word he wasn't gonna play. And my big thing was like, hey man, like Kyren's doing all this pass protection. They're not gonna have a rookie do it. And so like I think that's the role, like that's gonna get him obviously the gateway, right? To get more snaps. I will say Royce Freeman's played well in the weeks he was absent, but McVay has been a relatively honest coach. He was honest with Cup. And he said the goal is for Kyren to come back and they would love for him to have the same role he had, to assume the same role if he's capable of holding up to that. So that would be and neither site like kept him cheap. So I mean, I think people will be hesitant, especially what happened to HN last week.
Real quick before we go, I want to quickly talk about Pittsburgh and Cincinnati because I think this game is going to go largely overlooked in this AFC showdown in cold weather and potential wind and snow, maybe. So We just had T. Higgins got ruled out. We know that Jaylen Warren is kind of taking over this lead back role. I mean, they called him the starter in consecutive weeks, and he saw 15 carries and 9 carries, but he's gone over 100 yards in consecutive weeks here and scored. On the other side of that, is this a case with T. Higgins out where it's just like, I'm playing Jamar Chase? I don't care who his quarterback is. Very interesting. Are you seeing any upside here?
It's really hard, right? We've been in this boat like kind of all season. It's kind of been the MO for what we've seen all year for like quarterback play, right? Like we had the week with the Rams guys we talked about with Brett Ripien. We've had Garrett Wilson the entire season. We've seen Devontae Adams, right? Like we've seen a lot of DeAndre Hopkins with Will Levis. Like we've seen a lot of these guys that are clearly like wide receivers that are premier talents be kind of dragged into kind of this like unknown volatility zone. DJ Moore, Tyson Bagent when he took over, like it's just been kind of the theme of the season. So like, does that happen to Jamar Chase? Is he now just like one of these like wide receiver 2 types? And the other thing with it too, with the Jake Browning is like, he going to let it go? Because we've seen Zach Taylor, even with Joe Burrow, like he'll call a very condensed game. Like we've seen this before, and that gives me a little bit of pause. Warren, I think, becomes very interesting on this slate though, because the running back coach Eddie Faulkner is taking over play calling duties. So like, is that like a pro or we don't really know. Like, is that a pro or like a negative? Is he a guy that's been clamoring for more Najee, or is he's like, hey man, like now I'm going to unleash this dude. And the Bengals have been a team who literally targeted every week. So I think Jaylen Warren becomes a very intriguing guy on this slate.
It's an interesting dynamic there in Pittsburgh, right? I mean, they have the quarterbacks coach who's taking over the offensive coordinator duties, but it's going to be the former running backs coach that's going to be calling plays. Very interesting dynamic. I don't know what to make of it. 54.
No, I don't either. But like, I know that we have an explosive player versus a team that gives up a ton of explosive runs, and like, if you tell me like going in a game that we know it's probably going to be like relatively go through the backs anyways, like I even imagine the new quarterbacks coach, like they're not going to say like, we're going to win this game by Kenny Pickett completing 40 passes. I don't think like we're going to see a culture shift like that. So is it a thing where they want to inherently run the football? Like a couple weeks ago when they played Green Bay, they kind of tipped their handle, but it's like, hey, if we're up, like we'll run. So if he just gets to like, say you can get like 15 to 17 touches for Jaylen Warren, that's a significant difference between 9 to 12, like kind of where he's been.
100%. Both backs, I'll leave it with this. Both backs are viable in this spot. We saw Joe Mixon see 5 targets in his last time out. We know Jake Browning is not necessarily known as a NFL pro caliber ready quarterback. So we could see some.
He's been in the league since 2019.
Yeah, he has. Yes. I won't say what I was going to say.
It's the first time we've seen him. It's the first time we've seen him actually play, and he's been in the NFL since 2019.
Yeah, so take that for what it's worth. But I think also in that same discussion, I do think that Jamar Chase is highly intriguing. With T. Higgins out, is this a spot where Jake Browning is just going to only get through his first read, which is likely to be at a high rate Jamar Chase? And I think it correlates well with Jaylen Warren. I know the Bengals are their odds to make the postseason went down dramatically after the Joe Burrow injury, but they're not out of the picture just yet. So do they still make a push? I don't know. But if they do, and if they're in a negative game script here, I have to think that a solid chunk of the pass game usage is going to go through Jamar Chase. So I think this is a high upside potential here. In that same discussion of where are we paying up for, that is a potential option.
Oh yeah.
Rich, that was a blast as always, man. Do you have any parting shots for us?
No, I think we pretty much covered like most of it. It's kind of a unique slate where it's, even I don't know exactly where I'm going to hone my running back, like layout, right? Like even I don't have a firm grasp of really how I want to attack the running back position. And anytime that happens, it makes for kind of a unique slate, because we could just see a lot of volatility in terms of how teams are building rosters this week, right? Or if you just had the right players, right? It could just be where we're all inherently building similar rosters. And did you pick the right guys at 6K?
That's really where a chunk of the running back ownership is likely to come from, that like 6,500 to 6K range. So very interesting. Derrick Henry's in there. Can we
Yeah, we
trust
didn't
him?
mention Derrick Henry. I mean, they
Yeah.
kind of we're running out of games where the Titans are going to be home favorites this year. I can definitely tell you that.
And it's after Thanksgiving. You look at the splits, man. 5.5 yards per carry, something crazy after Thanksgiving. Anyway, man, that was a blast. Thank you again for joining us. You know where to find us. Get those questions in. We'll answer them to the best of our abilities. And this was another great show presented by 1 Week Season and Sharp Football Analysis. We'll see you guys.
1 Week Season.